A new Rolling Stone report claims organizers of the January 6th protest participated in dozens of planning meetings with both members of Congress and White House officials. They cite at least two sources who allege multiple members of Congress were directly involved in the planning of former President Trump's efforts to overturn his election loss, as well as the Capitol attack. A House Select Committee is currently investigating the January 6th insurrection, where multiple people died and hundreds were injured. For more on this, I want to bring in CBS News senior investigative correspondent Catherine Herridge. Catherine, welcome. It's good to have you. So in this report, protest organizers allege that they met with various people, including members of Congress and some Trump White House staff members. Do we know who exactly they allege they met with, which lawmakers and which White House officials?
Well, Elaine, the central allegation in the Rolling Stone report is that there was communication and coordination between a handful of organizers for the pro-Trump rallies, as well as members of Congress and perhaps even some officials deep inside the White House. The Rolling Stone report identifies 7 Republican House members, among them Marjorie Taylor Greene as well as Louis Gohmert. They both provided statements to CBS News that almost seemed to mirror each other. They took the position that they had no role in the planning of the rallies and no participation in the rallies. And Louis Gohmert went as far as to say that he wants to know who the anonymous sources are because he believes the claims amount to defamation. I think it's important to read the report very closely because what caught my attention is it talks about a reported dangling of a pardon for some of these individuals that's in an unrelated investigation. So we're not sure what that was and how that might play into any contact with the former chief of staff at the White House, Mark Meadows. So it's a very interesting story that certainly takes the reporting to another level and raises the question about potential coordination and communication between the organizers, Congress, and members in the White House.
Well, meantime, last week, the House voted to hold former Trump advisor Steve Bannon in criminal contempt for defying a subpoena. And this week, former acting assistant U.S. Attorney General Jeffrey Clark is expected to be the first Trump official to comply with the subpoena. What are we learning about this?
Well, Jeffrey Clark is extremely important. For one, as you just mentioned, the first high-level member of the Trump administration to comply with the subpoena, not try and fight it through the courts. And second, this was an individual who was really part of the foundational efforts to challenge the results of the 2020 presidential election. And one of the big blank spaces here, if you will, is whether there were discussions between Jeffrey Clark and President Trump leading up to January 6th. And that is a blank space that the investigators on the Select Committee really want to get some of the details, Elaine.
Well, the chair of the House Select Committee investigating January 6th, Congressman Benny Thompson, was asked on Face the Nation yesterday if former President Trump will be subpoenaed. Here's his response.
Nobody's off limits. We will be on an ongoing basis issuing subpoenas to various individuals around the country if we have enough evidence. And obviously, we are pursuing evidence, but if the evidence leads to former President Trump or anyone else, the committee is not resonant in pushing back on it. We will go forward with it.
All right, so Catherine, what might that suggest about the investigation's next moves?
Well, what the congressman is saying is what any solid investigator does, which is they follow the dots to where they lead and they try and connect them and they make decisions on who they want to subpoena. The challenge here is what recent history has told us. Just think back to the White House counsel, Don McGahn. Democrats, the House Judiciary Committee, wanted to subpoena him for testimony as to whether President Trump was following his legal counsel. That subpoena was issued, as I recall, in 2019, but it took the better part of 2+ years to reach a settlement on that issue and to get Don McGahn behind closed doors and to get his testimony. And that's just the White House counsel, right? That's not the President of the United States. So clearly there are legal issues or blocks in this particular case, and it becomes a question of how long both sides want to run out the clock for testimony from a former president.
Right, we'll see how that develops. Finally, Catherine, new internal documents revealed from Facebook suggest that the company knew it had problems with hate, polarization, and misinformation, but did little to stop it. Now, Facebook's response in part was, quote, "We're a business and we make profit, but the idea that we do so at the expense of people's safety or well-being misunderstands where our own commercial interests lie." Catherine, how might this have played a role in the January 6th attack?
Well, Elaine, we've discussed this a number of times on your show, and I got to say you've been ahead of the curve on this. When you think about social media, it's a form of digital radicalization. We first saw this type of radicalization with American citizens who joined ISIS and al-Qaeda, and now we see the same mechanisms in play with Americans who become radicalized by extreme ideology, both on the left and on the right, because what social media has allowed individuals to do is to gather very quickly in small groups where they share the same philosophies and ideology, and that becomes self-reinforcing. It amplifies those ideas. And what we saw on January 6th is allowed these individuals to have the courage to cross that threshold to violence. So the same mechanism we've really seen over the last 20 years, first with traditional al-Qaeda, ISIS terrorist groups, and now with extremist ideology on the left and on the right in this country.
Yeah, I mean, it really is quite sobering, Catherine, how much we have the echoes of the kinds of conversations about online recruiting, gathering, finding common, people who think in the same way, finding all of that online, but now talking about people domestically it's quite the shift. Catherine Herridge, Catherine, thank you very much.
You're welcome.